Hello to every participants. Welcome to our expert panel discussion called How to Deal with Surveys from Russia. And first, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. We have a good international team of speakers. Margarita Zavadskaya and Jussi Lassila from Helsinki. Alexei Minailo and Grigory Yudin from Moscow. And Maxim Alyukov from London. Actually, Maxim, in a way, also a Helsinki scholar, as he got his PhD from the University of Helsinki. Welcome back. And we will discuss today issues which are discussed among specialists for a number of years. But definitely recent developments increased an interest of use of surveys, not only among professionals, but also among the general public, activists, journalists, and the like. And in order to illustrate the salience of these issues, I will start from the question we got in advance from our distinguished colleague, Professor Emeritus of the University of Helsinki, Leo Grant. Leo posed the question: does 81% or 8% of Russians support Russia's actions in Ukraine? I doubt that the correct answer is close to 8 than 81%. Recently, the opinion of ordinary people in Russia has been interpreted by the opinion poll of the Levada, according to which 81% of Russians answered affirmatively to the question, do you support the actions of the Russian army in Ukraine? And this has been referred by many opinion leaders. But is this fact true? I certainly cannot say that I do not like it, but I doubt very much. One has to ask what is the response rate for the opinion poll and how the respondents attends to the question. The dissemination of dissenting views in Russia threaten a prison sentence. So it's safer to respond to the questionnaire is supposed to want, that is to accept the actions of the military. About 80–70% respond to the opinion poll. Others do not want to answer or are not available. And what about the survey itself? The response rate varied. While answering most questions, one can leave unanswered the question about Ukraine operation. Our colleagues estimate that about 10% of those take part in the survey answer this question. This would mean that we don't know what 90% of respondents think. All in all, we don't know what Russians think about attacks and actions of the army in Ukraine. And yet this is the essential question in the heart of our today's discussion. More specifically, what is the role of polls and surveys in autocracies in general? And where does the obsession with surveys come from? Usually experts rarely rely on polling data from authoritarian regimes such as Belarus. But why have survey research become so popular when it comes to Russia? Are these data of support of Russian special military operation reliable, and why? Is there any rallying around the flag effect? How to read Russian surveys? What kind of evidence can be used in addition to survey, and in which ways these sources are complementary or contradictory to survey data? How much do Russian respondents fear providing truthful responses? How many people refuse to answer or lie? And how these non-responses and preference falsification may affect survey results? And finally, as in Russia, terms such as war, aggression, or invasion legally forbidden to use in polls, how does it affect survey results? For answering these questions, I will propose that each of the panelists will answer on any of these questions, not necessarily to all. And the first round of responses will take 8 minutes from each panelist. Then I will add a couple of other questions. And then there will be a round of questions from our audience. Please feel free to write your questions to the chat, and I will announce them for our panelists. So let's proceed in the reverse alphabetical order. We will start from Margarita, then Grigory, then Alexei, Jussi, and Maxim. So please, Margarita, floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So this is a big honor to talk today. So this is a sensitive topic, and we know that Russian surveys are of great importance these days because the stakes are so high. Let me just kick off our discussion with some considerations of mine. So I do have some experience with surveys, both collecting data and of course analyzing them, and also working with less orthodox methods of data collection, such as survey experiments and things like that. I will start with the maybe somewhat provocative statement that relying on spreading the poll results today, at least in at this moment, that come from Russia, actually bring more harm than it should. So why is it the case? First, because these numbers are used and even weaponized, as Max Salukov is nicely laid out in one of his articles some time ago. They are weaponized by the Russian propaganda as an objective proof of mass support for the war or for the special military operation, a euphemism that is being used by the Russian media, and thereby makes all Russian citizens accomplices, no matter what they really think about the special military operation. So the second point I would like to make is that it sends a powerful signal to the anti-war activists, both in Russia and those who had to escape, even against their desire and against their will. And actually, it also sends a very strong demobilizing signal to those Russians who are still in Russia and who are still trying to fight the regime. So they're still alive and kicking, and they're constantly being told that they are a minority. So, and that all their efforts are in vain, and it doesn't make any sense to resist anymore. So it sends, again, a very strong and powerful demobilizing signal even to these people who are in a very unfortunate and difficult situation at the moment. So finally, what I would like to say here, just to kick off the discussion, is that what we know from the theory of information cascades, the opinion polls can be very volatile. And these information cascades are equally applicable to both democratic and non-democratic contexts. So even if we take Finnish polls, so let me bring this actually seemingly comparable example about the support for NATO membership. So even if we take these numbers, we see that they slightly differ, or sometimes not even that slightly, by 10 percentage points, depending on the agency that carried out the poll, depending on the timing, depending on the sampling procedure, and so on and so forth. And we still think that these polls are reliable. So we see the overall trend. So the Russian polls are of not that high quality, because even the sample size is smaller compared to those that come from Finland. So with 3,000 respondents, Russian polls are a bit different. It's not because Russian specialists are less qualified, it's just because it's just much harder to carry out this work and to organize in a way that it's safe for those who carry out independent surveys, and to formulate in a way that it does not endanger respondents to commit I mean, to be subject of for criminal charges. We know that if you say the W word in Russian context, it may bring some tangible consequences for those who do this, I mean, who use the word, and those who actually engage in this kind of conversation. So this is a completely different context. So, and finally, why I think that relying on spreading the poll results today at this moment is not the best idea, is because it provides a fertile ground for all kinds of utilitarist or even essentialist voices from the West who back up the indiscriminate ban of whatever Russian exists, thereby helping, again, Vladimir Putin and his allies to convince Russians that they are hated everywhere. And it actually creates this spiral of mutual hatred and even dehumanization, so, which is exactly a part of the war weapon. So, and this is why if we are dealing with survey data, we have to be extraordinarily cautious about their reliability and about how we're using them. And maybe the final point I would like to make today is that polls have this cunning trait and cunning feature of looking as these are objective numbers, because it's our mind, or it's kind of a cognitive bias that tricks us, that if we see the numbers, they kind of brings the aura of objectivity. So, and this is why people, without spending too much time on those who are not specialists in surveys and who are not specialists in studying dictatorships and public opinion in this context, they kind of use this data in a not the most appropriate way, and that again, it can bring much more harm, and especially to those people who are still in a kind of a double vulnerable position in the situation. And again, we still don't know how many Russians are against the war. We kind of know approximate estimates, and I guess Maxim, Alexei, and others will tell us, provide us some numbers or some estimates. But still, even if it's 5%, they are worth of support. If they are 20%, they're worth of support. So we cannot trade one life of one person for the life of another one, right? So because it brings us, into this very utilitarist and kind of, anti-Kantian way of thinking about how the world is, how the world looks like. So maybe I will stop here, and I will pass the word to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita, for such a provocative introduction. And let me give you a floor to Grigory Yudin, who recently published an excellent book called Общественное мнение, the public opinion, which actually deals with this issue. So floor is yours.
Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you for inviting me. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I will try to make it really short. Just a few points. Those points will be devoted to how to read those polls in Russia. So I will mention three things that I think are essential. So they are basically clues to correct reading of the polls in Russia. Well, the first thing is what I call the principle of acclimation. And this is useful to distinguish between two different models of understanding how polling, or actually how voting works. In the liberal model, it is voters who voice their preferences, who go to the polling stations, who answer the pollsters, and then there's some sort of ruler implements their preferences into decisions. It could be more or less responsive, could deviate from their preferences, but still the model holds. Whereas in the plebiscitarian model, and Russia was a plebiscitarian regime up until recently. In the plebiscitarian model, it's the other way around. First, the ruler makes the decision, and then the people acclaims. And this is a big difference, because it matters how people perceive the procedure they are engaged in. Within this plebiscitarian setup, where basically voting is acclamation, almost any decision will be claimed. I always invite people to think what would have happened if had Vladimir Putin announced on February 24th that he's giving those small statelets, Luhansk and Donetsk republics, back to Ukraine out of some security concerns. The results would have been exactly the same. Maybe the composition would be slightly different, but the exacts would be exactly the same. Why those poll numbers are so mesmerizing? Margarita already mentioned the objectivity aura created by those numbers, but it's also because the poll numbers invoke this liberal model immediately and create the illusion of the popular will combined from those individual preferences. And every time we look at those polls, we immediately presuppose this liberal model working. Whereas, of course, in Russia, at least, we can discuss about other countries, but in Russia, of course, it doesn't hold. And my point is that the closer polling questions are to a plebiscite, the closer they sound like a plebiscite questions to the respondents, like, do you support the president? Do you support the operation? The more likely it will be that they will trigger the acclimation reaction, the acclimation frame. And of course, during the wartime, questions are increasingly perceived as plebiscites because of the perception that the commands issued by the leader should be obeyed. And therefore, we have this rise in approval for all officials. I keep pointing that out, including, of course, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who, as you perhaps know, has some issues now. I mean, he's dead. But I don't know if pollsters keep polling on Zhirinovsky. I think his ratings might be either rising or at least not going down because of this effect of yes saying. Now, the second clue is, I think, a radical transformation that is going on in Russia now. I don't know if we'll right to the end, but there is some sort of fascist turn. For me, it is certain. We can discuss that, but for me, it is beyond doubt. And the polling ideology actually assumes that there are isolated individuals and they have their preferences. Well, I would say that this assumption is never fully correct, but in certain social settings, like those in Russia now, this becomes just patently false. Once again try to think of what would be the percentage of Germans supporting this special military operation against Poland in 1939. The question even makes sense, and the settings in Russia are pretty close to what they had in Germany in 1938 or 1939. I would remind you that actually Goebbels didn't want initially to introduce polls because he claimed that Führer had a direct contact with the people. He doesn't need those polls. Later, he reconsidered and even was close to introducing them, just didn't have time. But someone who brought this idea of introducing polls to Germany, Elisabeth Noel-Neumann, she worked for Goebbels. She later coined this concept, the spiral of silence. People use it casually, as it was like a common thing for this spiral of silence to happen. But actually, Noel-Neumann was, of course, referring to the totalitarian situation, when people are really scared. And now I think we have sufficient evidence that fear becomes a real issue. Perhaps Alexei will talk more about that. I think it's a real issue. Right now, we have a lot of evidence from independent pollsters that fear is growing. And finally, on that point, Russia is a depoliticized society. And in this sort of society, evasion is always the best strategy. So basically, on almost all political questions, the answer, what Russians do think, the correct answer is Russians don't care. I think it is still very much true concerning even this military operation. Russians are trying to protect their private lives, isolate themselves from all those events. But under this increasing fascist pressure, I think evasion increasingly takes the shape of loyalty because it's just perceived as the best strategy for evasion. Now, finally, the third principle. The principle of surveillance. And we have to understand that in Russia, and this is specific about Russia, polls are widely perceived as conducted by the state. This is something we established in our studies we basically do in the interviewing the interviewers. And this is something we established a long time ago. So respondents feel interpellated by the state, if we use Louis Althusser's term. They are called by the state through this polling. So the dominant framing for polling is to show your loyalty and use it as an opportunity to complain to the state. This, I think, matters a lot. And I also point to a very recent experiment published by Washington Post when they conducted a poll just in January in Donetsk, Luhansk regions. And the answer depended radically on where the call came from. What was the number? Either it came from Russia or from Ukraine. And the answers really depended on who was asking, because that means that for respondents, it's a different sort of communication. For that reason, I would like to push back against the whole idea of falsified preferences, because the whole theory implies that there are fixed preferences behind those answers, and people are just either revealing them or falsifying them. But those replies are actually emergent very much, and they needn't manifest any pre-existing preferences. We have to keep in mind this sort of communication. And I would like to, to what Marx said about polls being weaponized. I would rather add that during the wartime, the polls, they are even used as a tool of intimidation, of violence, because this is how they are very likely perceived by the people. And I would like to, just to finish that, I would like to mention a text published yesterday in Medusa by a journalist who pretended to do some polling. Of course, that was kind of crazy from a methodological point of view, but I think it tells a lot about how people react to being asked, react to being addressed in those times. Well, I will have several questions just to raise. I think we have to think of when we should stop conducting polls. What actually the basic conditions of validity for polls? I don't know if they were reached now, but maybe we have to have right to answer this question. But I also think I wouldn't mean that those polls make no sense whatsoever. I still think that observing dynamic still might make sense. Some intersectional differences still might make some sense, but using polls as those plebiscites, as the ersatz voting, as learning the popular will, this, of course, is erroneous, and I totally support Margarita on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Grigory. And now let me give a floor to Alexei Minailo, the person who is involved in survey research himself, and probably Alexei will provide certain responses to questions and concerns raised by Grigory and Margarita. Please, Alexei.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I will start with a quick observation, and then I will go to the data which explains or shows in numbers what Margarita and Grigory were talking about. So the observation which comes from communicating with people who support the war, like in Telegram chats and communication with government officials, is that Russia is a country of minorities, which means everybody, absolutely everybody, thinks they are a minority. So this comes from communication with people in pro-Donbass chats. So those who are in favor of the war, they are saying it's a terrible thing. It happened, but if it happened, it must be won. But they still tell that they, in their own country, patriotic people, are persecuted by the police, that they cannot gather money to send weapons to DNR, LNR, and to Russian troops. So even those people who consider themselves very patriotic, they feel that they are alone in the state. So it's not like there is some sort of huge pro-war movement, but people who are actually pro-war, they consider themselves lonely. And government officials, I just heard several opinions on this issue from top-level officials. They also feel completely alone. They feel that people are rejecting the war. And they say that their luck is that people do nothing actually about it, but many officials are pretty sure that people are strongly against the war. And somebody rationalizes it as we lost the information war, so that's why the people are against. And some say that this war just doesn't fit with popular perceptions of what the good government must do. This puts us actually to the old notion divide et impera. Those who organize it, who organize all, most influential things in Russia, they do everything that any sort of people, starting with very patriotic ones and ending up with high-level government officials, so that they would feel lonely. And what do you do when you feel that you are alone? Well, you fight. If you're a samurai, maybe 1% of the population might do that. Otherwise, you try to join the perceived majority because this is safe. Joining the majority is safe. Actually, this is what we see in polls. People are not stating their own opinion, but they join the majority. Margarita was saying about methodological problems. She's partly right, because wartime polls require smarter approach than regular polls. So the problem here is not with like sample size, because in Russia sample size of 1800 gives something like 95% confidence interval. But actually with the thing that it is pointless to ask frontal questions like about do you support or do you not support. So we've held some experiments. First of all, my team is performing a project Chronicles. So you can find it online at dorussianswantwar.com. So 3 are already published, and we are holding experiments to go beyond those frontal questions. So in the first wave, we found out that those who say they support the war mostly support a simulacrum. So a picture created for them by the state media. Not only state, but any like pro-state media, including many independent Telegram channels. What was our hypothesis? That was the end of February, the beginning of March, when we already had a lot of photos and videos of destroyed residential areas in Kharkiv and in Kiev. Our hypothesis was that if Russians did support the war, they would know that Ukrainians are hostile towards them. They would know the territory where the war goes. And they would probably feel negative emotions towards the Ukrainians, because if our army goes there, is fighting, is taking losses, is destroying residential areas, then probably those people who support these actions would feel that Ukrainians deserve it or something like this, because it would be total madness if you think the Ukrainians don't deserve it, but support the thing which is happening. So, and to test this hypothesis, we've held a phone interview of 1,800 respondents, so representative, so to say. Grigory will tell about representativeness, but we'll just use this word for technically. And we've analyzed our partner company Tazeros, analyzed for us 2.73 million posts in Russian social networks. So what we found out, first of all, 73% of those who state support for the war in a phone poll, they say that they believe or strongly believe official sources of information. So those are the sources where there is no war, there are no bombed residential areas, and the propaganda says that power in Ukraine is held by a small group of Nazis. So, and they're the only ones who oppose our army. That's what people thought. Oh, 1 minute remaining. Oh my God. Okay, so the analysis of social networks showed that dominating emotion, even among those who state support for the war, was sympathy, compassion towards the Ukrainians. The people really did believe that it's a special operation. The power is held by Nazis, and there was no casualties among the civilians. So that was our first wave of the research. In the second wave, we held 3 experiments that prove that people are afraid to tell what they think. So we've got, aside from the experiments, we've got a lot of replies like, I cannot tell you what I think about this military operation because the police will come and get me, or I would like a criminal punishment invoked. So we gave to half of the sample, we gave the options I support or I don't support. To half of the sample, we gave the third option, I do not want to answer the question. So when we gave this third option, the results of otherwise identical samples differed a lot. Like 20% of those who stated support for the war switched to I do not want to answer the question, which clearly shows that at least a significant number of people who state support for the war, that they actually do this out of fear that police will come for them or otherwise. And they give a socially acceptable answer. So that was proven with the experiment. The second experiment that we held, we asked people if they think it is a special military operation or not. So thinking that if it's not, then maybe people think it's a war. So in a phone poll, 63% of the participants said, yes, it's a special military operation. But when we go to search engines with like over 100 million queries about these events, we see that in Google, less than 1% Google for special military operation, and 99 and more percent are Googling war in Ukraine. If you go to Yandex, which is main Russian search engine, we see that 90% are Googling war in Ukraine, and only less than 10% are Googling for special military operations. So people lie outright. The majority of people lies during the polls. I don't mean that they specifically want to deceive the interviewer, but they do not say what they really think. They say something, for many people, I believe it might be subconscious, but they say something that really contradicts their view of reality. Well, and so the last one, considering how many people actually do support, during the third wave, we've held another, like, not actually an experiment, but method to find out who support or don't support what is really happening. We gave a choice. What would you choose to end the war right now without any conditions, or to fight to the defeat of the Ukrainian army, which is actually looks like it's the real choice now, how the war will end. 32% of the Russians said that they would rather end the war right now without conditions. 36% said that they would rather fight to the capitulation of the Ukrainian army. You see, when we consider this, it's like 50-50. We might go further, but unfortunately, I don't have time. Maybe I will tell about this later. Sorry for being so long, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. For those who are interested in details of Alexei's analysis. Margarita kindly provided the link to report in the chat. There is a link to yet another report. We will discuss it a little bit later. And now we will turn to Jussi Lassila, who is a professional user of survey data in his analysis. So, Jussi, please share your thoughts and ideas how we can deal with surveys from Russia.
Okay, thank you, Vladimir, and hello to everyone. I'm very flattered and honored to be here in such a company as in particular, not an expert on conducting surveys, but as a kind of a professional consumer of them. And I'm very glad of those background questions and issues you raised up. And I've tried to pick out first two, and maybe those a little bit aggregate some others. First of all, what is the role of opinion polls and surveys in autocracies and where that obsession comes from? And I think that it's important to point out that the importance of them in autocracies is in the big historical picture is related to the transformation of autocracies, especially in the period of the 20th centuries when the number of democracies rapidly increased. And in these days, maybe except North Korea, modern autocracies cannot rule only with a one-sided right of the dictator or monarch with the repression it justifies, but have long needed the external features and symbols, formal features and symbols of democracies. And as we still see, of course, another issue, whether it's any impact of that, but we do see the normal procedure that formal democratic institutions are under constant challenge of legitimacy, largely due to the external pressure of democracies and the impact of democracies, including the modern information technologies. So there's this sort of a risk of the fifth column and the like, how this autocratic propaganda might use it. And in this sense, the demonstrating direct popular support is essential for autocracies. And I think here's the role of the opinion polls and surveys, as well as maybe conducting elections, as referring to Grigori's presentations on more as a plebiscitarian type of ritual. And some would say that they are even more important in terms of their political value than in democracies, where there are kind of institutionalized routines. And when it comes to the independent opinion polls like Levada in Russia, so far the situation have been that I think that as long as they produce results that more or less satisfy or are not seen as harmful for authoritarian rulers, there is no need to limit them. And that this actually creates a kind of feedback mechanism where these independent surveys provide valuable information to the regime about the mood of citizens and orientated it to anticipate variety of political and social risks. And I think maybe now we are seeing in a kind of unprecedented situation, and I know what's going to happen in the future, but this has been maybe the major difference between Russia and Belarus, and now the situation might be changing in the direction of Belarus, where the independent information cannot be produced anymore, that those feedback mechanisms that used to be there are no longer existent due to a variety of reasons, and actually it creates the situation where this sort of an independent, well, maybe the independent data can be produced and conducted, but there's no ways how to convey it to the political leadership or the administration in the top of the leadership. And this creates this sort of a deepening spiral where surveys begin to produce more and more the kind of information that autocrat wants to hear. And this actually deepens the gap between the perceptions of the leadership and the actual social reality. And this maybe the case in point was the Belarus in August 2020, when in all counts, maybe Lukashenko believed that he's truly had the 80% support. About the rally around the flag, I think when I, for example, compared the Levada Center's approval indexes of different institutions of power between February-March 2014 and February-March this year, the situation looks pretty similar. There was a great leap not only in Putin's support, but also in approval of those institutions that have not been particularly popular among the population, like the Prime Minister, government, or even the State Duma, as well as the governors. And the latter is particularly interesting because the governors have not played any particular role in the country's foreign policy debate. However, they will be in a central role how to manage the different socioeconomic challenges that are now accumulating, and this typical system where the regions have to take the responsibility of those difficulties. So I would say that, yeah, the rally around the flag certainly exists, but the degree of its patriotism or nationalism or this kind of euphoria is a different matter. And I would see that it represents some sort of a general universal gathering under authorities and institutions in major exceptional situation. This is kind of universal thing. However, what was interesting that this did not happen in Russia during the COVID-19, as in many other countries. And now, as the previous presentations quite well demonstrated, that there are all kinds of factors, circumstantial evidence, and also these list experiments and other experiments, which show that the level of patriotic euphoria is far from that level what was case in 2014, if we compare it what was the rally around the flag in then. And 80 years ago, the social debate was much more freer. The regime relied on the support of the majority of the population, and what is perhaps more important, it trusted also that the minority remains the minority. That there were, for example, the anti-war marches, but they were allowed to exist because there was a trust in the regime's narrative about the conquest of Crimea and this sort of a patriotic euphoria. And now this is completely absent, and the level of repression and censorship is previously unseen. Information and opinions are definitely controlled now by ruthless fear, and definitely in this sense it's well justified to agree with those who doubt all kinds of citizens' honest willingness or readiness to answer the questions about the special operation or whatever, also about Putin's approval or support to Putin. However, on the other hand, it's undeniable what we have used to see in different cases, that the politically apathetic majority is typically highly conformist in the given context. I trust what the administration is doing, and therefore I support it. I have no reason not to support it, etc., etc. So in this sense, I would see that maybe it's more important than considering whether these figures are reliable or not, to estimate the duration of these and conditions of duration of the now the ongoing rally around the flag. What are the conditions for citizens to commit to the support we are seeing now, when we take into account the conditions, especially in the socioeconomic field, or the developments which are in the head of Russia? So this deteriorating economic situation, in light of it, I think the motivation of the people for this sort of a permanent or persistent regime, persistent support is not particularly strong, and I still doubt that the kind of the fascistization of the Russian society, still the kind of societal factors for that are not particularly strong. Especially there is no such a nationalist civil society which used to be in some other cases. But definitely these are the first thoughts I would like to now raise up. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks so much. And I would encourage all of the participants to write the questions to the chat, and we will try to raise these questions during the discussion portion of our panel. And now let me give a floor to Maxim who was a participant of this discussion, and I think that Margarita already passed on to the chat a link to his comments. So Maxim, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to pitch in my 2 cents about political implications of survey, kind of elaborating on what previous speakers said on what Margarita and Greg and Alexei and Jussi said. So, and say a few words about the kind of general role of surveys in authoritarian regimes and specifically in Russia. So Russia is a personalist autocracy, right? So it's a very opaque regime where we don't really know what's happening inside because the power is concentrated within the hands of one or several individuals, and there are no formal channels of deliberation. So that's why we are so sensitive to leaks, right? And we are so sensitive to all this science, like how Putin grabbed the table, maybe he is unwell. And the same happens with surveys, right? So because we don't know much about the state of public opinion as well, because there are no elections, there are no public participation in public protests. Basically, protests are brutally dispersed, independent media are banned. And that's why surveys seem to be one of the few remaining ways to the public opinion for both the public and the regime, because we know that Putin's regime has been relying on surveys, on polling data for a long time, for like 20 years. And this leads to a sort of vicious circle, because authoritarian regimes rely on violence, they produce fear, and a byproduct of this fear is socially desirable answers. So when, as a result, we don't know the kind of distribution of political preferences, and the regime does not know the distribution of political preferences. And then we relentlessly poll the scared people, asking them about their political preferences, and what we get is socially desirable answers. And then we announce them publicly, and these results encourage citizens to kind of give socially desirable answers, even more swaying public opinion. So there's this kind of vicious circle. We don't know what's inside. We poll them, we get the wrong distribution of political preferences. We show these preferences to people, and then we get inflated results again, because in this way we encourage citizens to adopt certain positions. And I just want to briefly mention 2 studies which kind of demonstrate how this influence of polls actually work. One was conducted a couple of years ago by Sam Green and Graham Robertson, and the other one was just published a month ago. It was done by Noah Buckley, John Rater, Katerina Tertishna, and Karl Marquardt, and they actually show how this influence actually works. So back in 2017, Sam Green and Graham Robertson explored the relationship between personality traits in Russia and political ideology. And they use this very commonly known model in psychology, which is called Big Five. And what they found is that, well, usually in democracies, we have certain correlations between political ideologies and traits, and it's logical. So liberals, for instance, score high on openness. So they are kind of more open to new experience. And conservatives score low on openness because they are kind of more close, and this is logical because ideologies, liberal ideology emphasizes change, and conservative ideology emphasizes stability and order, and so on and so on. What they found, however, is that in Russia, the most important trait which distinguishes between opposition supporters and regime supporters was agreeableness, so the desire to maintain positive relationships with others. And basically, it gives us, it tells us that the kind of structure of political polarization in Russia is very different than it's how it works in democracies. So in democracies, you have different ideologies, and they compete for kind of country's future, and political dissent is legitimate. And those who adhere to different ideologies, we assume by default that we do not doubt their patriotism. So in Russia, this dissent is illegitimate, it's delegitimized. So essentially, you are either a patriot and you stick to the regime's version of the country's future, or you are seen as a traitor. And it kind of produces a very different dynamics of political ideology and public opinion and polarization. So basically, if you are against the regime, you have to face consequences. You have to be ready to face stigmatization, conflict, and so on. So it kind of introduces this additional filter to how people structure their preferences. So in addition so for opposition supporters, there's this additional layer. So you have to have certain political views to be an opposition supporter. You have to be, liberal, but you also have to face challenges. So it's basically, this is additional layer which filters people out. And for regime supporters, you have this additional magnet. So people with specific personal traits, they are drawn to the regime poll, although they do not have pro-regime preferences. So they kind of feel uncomfortable with facing conflict and stigmatization. And it also tells us that people are very sensitive to social consensus. So they are not comfortable with conflict and stigmatization, and they seek to adopt the views of what they see as the majority position in society. So they tend to think the way they think other people in society think. And for these people, inflated survey results distributed on television and repeated by Kremlin propagandists, they basically suggest them to, they send them a signal suggesting to adopt this majority position. So basically the results themselves, they convince other people, they give them this cue or a signal to adopt the majority position, which is basically a pro-regime position. And the other study was published just a month ago, where political scientists basically investigated directly how survey results affect how people think about the regime. So they've been conducting survey experiments throughout the last year, asking people about their support for Putin. So list experiments were included to avoid preference falsification. And they basically assigned them different preambles saying that, for instance, one group was assigned a preamble saying that 2/3 of Russians support Putin. And another group was given a different preamble saying that only 2/3 of Russians support Putin. And you can guess what happened, right? So for people in this negative group, only 2/3 of Russians support Putin. It basically decreased regime support by 10–11%. Right, so meaning that the popularity of Putin is, to a significant degree, is based on the information about popularity of Putin. So basically, they call it endogenous popularity, meaning that this popularity is endogenous in itself. It's driven by information about popularity. And this kind of, people are social creatures, right? So there's wealth of evidence in psychology suggesting that they use opinions of others as cues to form their own opinions. And in authoritarian societies such as Russia, this dynamic is aggravated by fear, by stigmatization, and basically inflated research survey results circulated on media, on television, repeated by Kremlin propagandists. They take advantage of this dynamic, swaying public opinion even more. So there's good news here, right? Because we know that the regime support is partially based on the fact that people see what people kind of see as the majority position in society, and presenting more kind of objective distribution of political preferences can tip the balance, changing their opinions, right? But there's also bad news here, because these survey results are repeated by Kremlin, by propagandists, by Margarita just a few weeks ago. She mentioned FTOM results suggesting that the regime support is high in Russia, and they are widely circulated across media. So ultimately, these results themselves become a part of propaganda, kind of forcing people to adopt pro-regime position. So I think we should be concerned with how these results themselves shape the opinions of citizens, at least as much as with whether they actually represent something. Thank you.
Thanks so much for all of our panelists. Now there is a round of questions and answers, and let me start from the question raised by Alexei Titkov in the chat. The logic polls measure support is what polls measure seems like a vicious circle. How can we redefine what is support and not support in smarter ways? There is a possibility for panelists to respond, not necessarily that you should respond, but if you wish to respond, please indicate by raising your hands, is a real hand or virtual hand. And those who will respond, I will give you up to 3 minutes each. Sorry, because we have quite a number of questions. I see Alexei, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So that's what we do, trying to find some smart ways to ask audience. Because what we try to do is to give people choices and to make them think. just a little bit during the interview, but think, and to give concrete choices. Because if you ask a person, do you support or don't support, that's just the people join the majority, the perceived majority. But we ask concrete things. What do you think is better for what the government should do? Put priority on saving Russian economy or on winning the war? That is a very concrete thing, because 39%, according to our survey, 39% of Russians already felt they're becoming poorer. So, and here they start to think, okay, what do I want? Some sort of pride or to live better than I do now and not to live worse. Or what I've been already talking about, what do you think the government should do? Lead this war till Ukrainian army capitulates or end the war right now without conditions? That is a more concrete thing than support, don't support Mamba Jamba. Because war to the victory of the Russian army and capitulation of the Ukrainian army, it's dead soldiers, dead citizens, it's spiraling down economy, and so on and so forth. That is the thing. It's it's not just some kind of support for special operation. It's the war to the defeat of the enemy, bloody and so on. And when you give people these choices, when you compare what they're saying, you can get a more reliable picture. So during the war, any qualitative research is unreliable. That there are this much unreliable, like asking your support, and this much unreliable when you ask smart questions. And I've been telling that 36% of Russians choose that Russian army should lead the war to victory till the Ukrainian army capitulates. But if we cross that with the results of economic question, what do you think should be priority of Russian government? Saving the economy or winning the war? And if we, from this 36%, if we subtract people who said that the priority should be saving the economy, you get 24% of those who are actually in support of this war, because there is a contradiction. Yeah, the people say that Russian army should win, but that the government should put a priority not on winning the war, but on saving the economy. So these 12% are not really sure that the war should be won. So we ask many concrete questions, and then we see which areas cross. So if the people want to both win the war and then they don't want the economy to be saved, then they are pro-war. Well, more pro-war than anybody else. And if they want the economy to be saved, I'm not really sure they want this war to be to be led till defeat of the Ukrainian army. Thank you.
Thank you. Other panelists, do you want to respond to this question?
Yeah, can I pitch in my few cents? I also think that support is kind of too general category, and it's a bit vague and meaningless. And there's a lot of literature and public opinion literature saying that that's part of the problem. So people might have some attitudes, but these vague survey questions just do not make any sense, right? So do I support the war? What does it even mean? So we should rather ask about specific issues. And but the problem, however, is that why do we ask about support and political identification very often in surveys? Because it's kind of inherited trait from the, I think, Western public opinion literature, when political identification actually means something. When if you know that a person is Republican, you can predict attitudes towards all kinds of issues, right? Towards masks, towards kind of abortion, gun rights. So in Russia, this thing doesn't matter much. So if you understand that, if you kind of ask this question about support and then find out this person supports Putin, it doesn't tell you much about other political preferences because there is no kind of structured ideology. And that's why I would be more in favor also asking more specific questions about specific attitudes towards specific issues, because the general questions, they are criticized a lot in the literature. People just find it very difficult to map these questions on their own attitudes towards politics and life and society.
Okay, thank you. Then there is a question from Maya Haryu. Since the polling results cannot be trusted as a picture of the public opinion as highlighted during the discussion, what are the polling results good for? Earlier, Grigory Yudin argued how they can be understood and analyzed as a form of demonstrating support and as a form of communication, and they are weaponized by the regime to legitimize the war and used to affirm the pro-regime support by diffusion. But what else they are good for? From academic or oppositional points of view, for the latter, I was reminded of Zoomное голосование project, where polling results, among other sources, were critically used to channel the opposition war. I wonder if Grigory may start, and probably somebody else will join.
Well, I don't think I have much to answer here. I actually think it is a very, very valid question. People finally should start asking what actually this whole thing is good for, because that exactly puts the whole polling industry in a context. Like, whom does it work for? Because the authority of the polling agencies relies on this strange idea that they are somehow objective and just function as a mirror for the society, which is, of course, I mean, it's not true. They are part of the political setup. So this, I think, is a very good question to ask. But as for the answers, I think actually Alexei was pointing to very useful things in his reply to the previous question. I do believe that we have to avoid those plebiscitarian setups. And as we avoid them, as we kind of dig deeper into the motivations, feelings, emotions, into the everyday life, basically, of the people. That's what Alexei actually was pointing to. I think it becomes much more useful both in academic terms, in terms of understanding what's going on there, but also in terms of kind of finding some sort of support for alternative political strategies, and even presenting this support to the public. I mean, we had this conversation. It can actually be even at some point can even be actually weaponized for the oppositional aims, if and when we find a considerable support in those polls for a different sort of policy that would be driven by a different sort of framing, because the framing is what matters most. So experimenting with framing, with wording of questions, with all that is crucial. But in order to do that, we have to finally start thinking out of the box of the agenda promoted by the Kremlin. What is striking here is that everyone, including the public opinion, global public opinion beyond Russia, keeps thinking within the agenda provided or built by the Kremlin. So when a different agenda is set up, then of course we will get different results, and they can be used even for political means. So I very, very much value Alexei's comments regarding the previous question.
Margarita, please go ahead.
Just to continue on what Greg has just said, what really matters here, just to paraphrase Alexei Titkov, who also asked the previous question. So what really matters here is not numbers, it's words. So I'm not here to say that these polls are complete rubbish, but some of them definitely are. What I'm trying to say is that it really requires a much deeper understanding of the context. And if we talk about experts and those who are not specialists in area studies and those who are not specialists in Russian or post-Soviet or authoritarian politics or polling industry, actually, as long as this data are not in the hands of those who do not understand how to work with them, it would bring much more harm. This is why I'm advocating for just, from the ethical point of view, it's just easier to stop publicizing the data, not collecting perhaps the data, but publicizing it exactly for these purposes. But as long as we already have this data, so we cannot just, go back in time and change what we have at the moment. So what we can do with them and how we can make sense of them. So first of all, we can study metadata. Even if we take rubbish surveys provided by the when the methodology is wrong, when the wording is wrong, we can look at the non-response rates as long as they're available. We know that Levada is notoriously known for not publishing or providing this data. And this is a huge, huge drawback. So second, what we can take a look at is actually what is the wording and how people react to the wording. So Alexei Miniailo provided us a fantastic overview, and I strongly recommend to go to the link and see how actually respondents' questions change depending on the wording. And finally, let me also advertise another survey experiment, which is a way to overcome these difficulties of interpretation and reliability of data, at least to preserve some kind of, make sure that there is some kind of internal validity in this data. So this is the study by Max Schaub and Philip Chetkovsky. They carried out an online survey. Online is a little bit better because it's not a live person who is asking you something. So we know that telephone, computer-assisted surveys, they do differ in terms of what is the non-response rate and how people react to them. So what they found out is that the preference falsification, we can criticize the concept, but they just relied on it, is about 15%. And apparently, according to their estimates, so the number of people who approve the war is about the 51%, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember it right. So again, so it's not the overwhelming majority. It's still the majority, but it's much less. So it's another way if we use some of these item count techniques and some smarter ways to work with this data, so we can still take advantage of this data. But again, when it comes to policy making of those people who are not specialists, so they would not spend so much time on digging into this item count techniques, and they will report this data as if they come from a Finnish society or from any other democratic state. So this is why, again, we cannot expect policymakers to be experts in survey industry. So this is why we need to make some choices. So these are not completely useless, but they are for specialists.
Thanks, Margarita. Grigory also referred in the chat on yet another project called Extreme Scan. There is a link to the publication. Maxim, you would like to add something?
Yeah, I want to say that even data collected by state-controlled pollsters, such as FOM and so on, can be useful if you don't treat these numbers as absolute numbers, right? So when the first poll conducted by FOM was published, Mikhail Sokolov, for instance, conducted an analysis looking at the relationships, and that's useful, right? So how many people? So what is kind of just a demographic distribution of support or opposition? And when you read social science papers, for instance, you never find people looking in absolute numbers. They always look at relationships, right? So people who watch television are 2 times more likely to vote Putin or something like that, right? And that's useful. So they can inflate the results in terms of absolute numbers, but the relationships are still useful. And I think Russian field has been doing a great work disaggregating this data recently, right? So they've been doing this infographic showing that how many people among those who supported watch television, or how many people of those who think that the country is moving in negative direction think this or that. So it's very useful to look at the relationships. The most important thing is just not to treat this as a absolute numbers, as a kind of representation of society. So they're not representative, but they still tell you a lot useful, give you a lot of useful information.
Yeah, thank you. Then there are 2 questions which I would like to come. Oh, sorry, Alexei, please go ahead, but please a little bit briefly. Yeah.
Yes, just a little bit of out of the box thinking. So if we want polls results to be useful, we must educate journalists to properly read the reports and so on, because all the reports that we've done, you know what 99% of the journalists did? They just asked, okay, how many do support or don't support? And hey, our research is not about this. Look what, okay, never mind. So much support, so much don't support to print. So if we educate the journalists, they might spread the valuable information, not just these raw numbers.
Yeah, thank you. Two questions from Emil Mitika and Ekaterina Zvyagintseва regarding alternative sources of data. Are there evidence from other studies with different methods, not surveys that paint a different picture of war support among Russians? Studies that point that majority of Russians do not support the war and accept it in silence. Do you see any alternatives to quantitative research, considering that survey and polling data cannot be viewed as reliable in today's Russia? What is the role of qualitative research in the current context? I wonder if any of you would like to respond to these questions. What else may be used in addition to survey? Yes, please, Jussi, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. I think this whole discussion and the background for the panelists, that there seems to be some sort of a controversy regarding the massive number of all kinds of circumstantial and anecdotal evidence. And I remember this quite recently. There was an Polny Albat's broadcast, and there was a major disagreement between Yevgenia and Andrei Kolesnikov from the Carney that this cannot be true, because all the Yevgenia's kind of personal networks and this kind of more on the qualitative based observations, which we see that it is definitely anecdotal, did not support the idea of, and actually she referred not to on her personal network, but some others. So there is seems to be a major controversy that what these surveys demonstrate and what other information seems to suggest, and then this may be the at least it forces us to take it to the more holistic approach to these numbers. Well, one example, for example, that as far as we have an access of, for example, the internet traffic and what our people are looking for, we see that quite enormous interest, for example, the sort of non-governmental information, rapid increase from the VPN connections and the like. Of course, the critical arguments would say that would it be actually some sort of a minority business here? But I think that when we take into a look the level of internet penetration in Russia and so forth, so there are quite a lot of this sort of maybe to pinpointing variety of controversies regarding the figures, and which cause which definitely do not allow to say that these are completely false, these survey figures, but at least there are some issues that we have brought apparent here.
Yeah, Grigory noted in the chat that there is no effect of educating journalists, as everyone is mesmerized by the idea of holding a plebiscite, and this is a political problem, not educational. Yes, of course, well, the use of data by consumers of data is a bigger problem, and probably it worth a special panel discussion. But being one of the users of data on public opinion, not necessarily survey data, but also some qualitative data such as interviews or focus groups. Actually, Maxim wrote his dissertation on formation of mass perceptions with the use of focus groups. I always ask myself, and I just wonder what may be the answer from our panelists. To what extent what people in Russia, and probably not only in Russia, think affect what they actually do? Because what we observe nowadays, that those who are supporters of these special military operations, according to surveys, and those who are opponents of special military operation, according to survey and other data sources, they basically common that they do nothing. They, at least as of yet, mostly observers of what they can see on TV or on the web. And from this perspective, mass preferences, whether or not they are true or falsified, not convert into any actions. Words not converted into deeds. And if so, what kind of information we receive from whatever sources of what public think? I would draw the parallel with what our colleagues from economics actually faced. They tend to rely for many years upon data on currency exchange rate. But as for now, this data tell us little about the state of public finance and Russian economy, because currency exchange heavily regulated by the Russian central bank. So now serious economists refuse to use this information if not provided experts with a signal of what's going on in the Russian economy. Whether or not we should rely upon any information of what people think, why it is so important, as people probably play no role for what's going on in the battlefield, what kind of decisions proposed and implemented by authorities and the like. I know that this question may sound highly provocative, but I would greatly appreciate, and I believe our audience would greatly appreciate, if you will share some of your thoughts on this matter. If anyone would like to respond, that would be great. Yes, Margarita, please go ahead.
This is indeed a provocative question, but it also opens up a very rich perspective of what we can study, and actually opens up the perspective on how actually useless surveys are in terms of predicting people's behavior. So attitudes is one thing, and they can be extremely volatile. So I'm not saying that all surveys, again, are completely useless, but when it comes to actions, so there is some evidence, including experimental evidence, that it's not very likely that people's opinions will translate into their real actions. So they do translate, but under specific circumstances. If I can rely on other people's studies here and on some laboratory experiments, usually it happens when your own opinion is amplified by, encouraging actions and encouraging opinions that actually are articulated by the media, your peer groups, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of reinforced and makes you behave upon your opinion. So this is what is called by the media specialists friendly media environment, supportive media environment. And this is actually how propaganda actually can work. So if your own beliefs are amplified by television, by the print media, and your friends and your relatives, so it can potentially make you act upon your beliefs. But again, it's still the surveys do not show us the percentages. So, and going back to alternative data, so I think what is really important here is, I completely agree with Vladimir, to take a look at the cash withdrawal, for instance, as what actually Russians do in the case of any crisis. So, or what actually, how their consumer behavior changes. So if they start savings, or if they do any manipulations with their bank accounts. So this is a much more telling indicator of how much trust they have in state and public and financial institutions in the country. So, and they might actually quite drastically differ from what they declare, and even if they think that they genuinely believe in that. So this is kind of evidence which is, I think, much more reliable and telling in this regard. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. Maxim, please.
Yeah, I want to add a few thoughts to what Margarita said. So I think since again the expression of opinion in authoritarian regimes is problematic, that's why we tend to focus on the survey results so much, because there are no other kind of sources or other sources of data limited, and we tend to put too much emphasis on thoughts and opinions. And before studying communication, I was a social movement scholar, and in social movements literature, that's one of the kind of key ideas. Okay, people can have attitudes they can agree with the goals of certain movement, but very few of them will actually participate in this movement because there are so many other factors which are important for participation. So do they have peer networks? Are they included in these peer networks? Are there any organizations which constitute the backbone of this movement? What is the kind of political context? So the function or the kind of importance of opinions and attitudes is just very minimal there, right? So just non-existent. And social movement scholars noted, have been noticing for a long times that only 1, 2, 3% of people who have certain affinity towards the movement actually take part in this movement. And that's why many people say that, you have only 20, 30% of Russians opposing the war. It's not enough for the democratic change and revolution. Well, these things just exist in parallel universes, right? So these opinions do not translate into political action, and there's no direct relationship between these issues. So it can be that 2% of people is enough for the democratic revolution, and it can be that 100% of people opposing the war is not enough for a protest. So the protests and attitudes are not just directly related. So we just tend to put too much emphasis on these opinions and attitudes. There are so many other factors which are important.
Yeah, thank you. And now we have more questions in the chat. And again, I would suggest those who would like to raise their questions, please, there is a Q&A session, there is chat. Please type your questions and I will definitely announce them. So the question by Mirzohid Karshi from comparative perspective. How do the polls compare to the ones in other countries which were in warlike situation, like Iraqi war in Afghanistan, Balkans in the 1990s, etc.? And what if compare Russian polls during special operation in Syria or during Russian-Georgian conflict in 2008? Yes, Grigory, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I don't think I have a kind of general answer. I would just say two things. One is that I am very, very skeptical of the polls now being conducted in Ukraine with this overwhelming support for Zelensky, which kind of reaches 100% for similar reasons. Of course, Ukraine is much more pluralist society. There's a lot more space for dissent there, and they're still not repressing really that much. But that's a country of the martial law. They ban in opposition parties which are somehow perceived to be affiliated with the enemy. So I'm really skeptical about those numbers. This is number one. And number two is that actually the Syria case, I think, was one of the most just clear. I think I even put it on my book a couple of years ago, because it was precisely the case to illustrate the acclimation. Just a couple of years before the start of the Syrian operation, Levada conducted a poll asking if Russians would support kind of military intervention into Syria, and was overwhelmingly against that, overwhelmingly. And then what happens next? We have this decision taken by Russian leadership, but we also have this specific framing for this decision announced by the state media. And then the question is asked again using this specific framing. Do you support like limited military intervention that will end soon? Fine, everything will be happy. So are you in support of that? And then you get like in 2 weeks you get overwhelming support for that, which basically means that Russians don't care.
Okay. Is there any other response to this comparative question?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken, but if I'm not mistaken, up to 70% of Americans supported the invasion in Iraq. But again, it does not mean that they actually wanted the war, right? It's just how polling and propaganda work together, and it's I think very close to the results produced by Russian pollsters.
Yes, Grigory, please.
Yeah, just a short follow-up. Yeah, a short follow-up on that. I think actually there is a tendency, I think, in reality of the pluralist societies, there is a tendency of this like military enthusiasm to emerge at the initial stages and then to go down. And this is exactly what happened in the US. I think like that even in Russia, there's still a chance of it happening, if and only if this doesn't turn like in a full-blown fascist situation. Because if it happens, then I mean, of course, these numbers, I mean, they totally lose the meaning we now tend to invest them with.
Alexei and then Margarita.
Just a short notice about comparing with other countries. I published the results in English of our surveys on Twitter, and I received a huge number of replies. Whoa, maybe Russia isn't so different from the US after all, or we saw it in Brexit. So of course it's a different setting, but there are some similarities between how older people react or people who trust too much some other source of information.
Yeah, Margarita, please.
So just to piggyback on that, we do observe this rallying effect when this state is in conflict with another country. So, but most of the data we observe, we got so far are either from countries like United States, which are democratic states, and we also see this, manipulative upswings and going back to normal in a while. So, but we do not have so many comparable countries that would share the similar feature with Russia, a high capacity repressive state, and at the same time featuring independent pollsters. So I really did some research. I worked hard enough, and I failed to find any other similarities. I went through the Malaysian polls when Malaysia was an electoral authoritarian regime. Then I also took I took a look at the Uzbekistani, Belarusian data, so on and so forth. They do not have alternative independent pollsters such as Nevada. So Russian state is sort of unique. So we usually tend to think, so most of our conversation proves that Russia is a normal country in a strange way, but still we're dealing with, living creatures, but normal people living their normal lives, but under very unusual, strange circumstances. So, but these strange circumstances really make this polling data in a way unique. So this is something that needs clearly deserve academic attention. And the last point I would like to make is on rallying effect. Jeremy Morris, our colleague from Denmark, also mentioned that there is a possibility of the so-called defensive rally, since Russian state propaganda is so powerful that they can picture international sanctions as like the rest of the world is against Russia. And now actually it seems to be the case. So it's like self-fulfilling prophecy. So, and basically this information can be used for some kind of a secondary kind of a rallying effect. So of course, the conventional theory tells us what Greg just mentioned, that this rallying effect, if there is any, should actually go down. But there might be also, since the authoritarian state of Russia, it can be a secondary kind of rallying, this kind of defensive rallying, including those who tend to be in the opposition. So, and again, this is another argument for not publicizing and spreading the numbers. So going back to my initial point, thank you.
Thank you. And this issue of international dimension, also connected with the question by Olga Davidova-Mingier. What differences do you see between the reliability of the polls conducted among Russians living inside Russia and those living abroad, including Russian speakers in Finland? I would add that actually Russians living abroad, which are of course beyond the scope of polls by Levada and VCIOM and whatever other polling projects in Russia, actually demonstrate not only words but also deeds. We see some collective actions condemning the special military operation, and we see some pro-Kremlin rallies and actions in various parts of Europe. So it's quite a different context, and definitely it warrants an analysis from the viewpoint of surveys and other observations. Grigory, please.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say what you just said, that it is worth studying. I haven't seen those studies. I think it's really interesting. Well, hypothetically, I would think that some of the factors that produce those numbers in Russia apply to Russians abroad, such as the plebiscitarian setup. So they might be, again, particularly those holding Russian citizenship, might be think that they need. I mean, they still kind of belong to this big community and still follow the decisions of the leader, no matter what the decisions are. But I also think that, of course, in those countries, it brings a different sort of agenda, the agenda of those countries, such as anti-Americanism, for instance, which is different in Germany than it is in Russia, or in France than it is in Russia. That might be a combination of these two factors. So the political divisions and attitudes within those countries, and the sense of belonging to a larger community of Russians who are united through their leader. And I'm now talking about the support for this war, because I mean the opposition is I think is easier explained.
I wonder, Margarita, please.
So there is, I just was lucky enough to be a part of one of the projects that carried out research and online survey, panel survey actually, among Russian migrants, but they must be viewed different, I mean, in separation from those from the Russian-speaking diaspora. These are completely different communities. So they might have quite dissimilar pictures, so to speak. So if I can share some very briefly, some outlook of the data we've just had. So it's not published yet, but it will be at some point, so hopefully very soon. So the data we've got is that most of those who emigrated from Russia, who fled the country after the war erupted, they're relatively well off in terms of their financial meaning, so they can support themselves. They do speak foreign languages quite fluently, so they have an extraordinary high level of education. So about a third of them are IT specialists. They come from IT industry, so it was relatively easy for them to emigrate. They're also afraid of being discriminated against, but very few of them do report that they really encountered any cases of being discriminated on the real estate market or anywhere else. So, and actually 83%, if I'm not mistaken, actually 81%, sorry, they know what the smart vote is, compared to the Levada data, for instance, when this number is lower than 10%. Which means that these people are very anti-regime. So most of them, so the very knowledge of the smart voting strategy clearly indicates the political stance and the political outlook of the people who emigrated. So that's one thing. Most of them are in their mid-30s, so these are relatively young people. Most of them are without children, so again, so they are quite flexible in terms of changing their life conditions. So, which also means that if we are talking about those opposition voters or opposition citizens who stayed in Russia, perhaps they just were not able to leave. So that's another question. So, and it's unfortunately these groups are going under the radars at the moment. So that's just some preliminary numbers. If we talk about diaspora, so there is some research, I think even done in Finland by the specialists from Tampere, for instance. So, and I think they also rely on survey statistics, but it's quite unclear what is the percentage of those who do support the special military operation who do not support here in Finland. But if we look at the deeds and collective actions, so there is an impression again that the anti-Putin and anti-regime mobilization is quite prominent, not just in Finland, but also in the Czech Republic, in other countries, in the Netherlands. So you can actually find these Russian activists quite quickly. And about reliability of these polls, I think they're quite reliable. So people were quite open in telling providing the information. We just got maybe out of 2,000 responses, we've got only 2 responses indicating that like passing the greetings to the Tavarish Mayor. So there were only 2 of them. So it means that the level of trust was quite high among those people.
Yeah, thank you. As I don't see any new questions in the chat, I wonder if panelists may raise their own questions to other panelists. There is a possibility as we have some time remaining. No questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Greg to comment on this idea about preference. I've been thinking about the usefulness or uselessness of this concept. So could you maybe talk a bit more about how and whether we should use the concept of preference falsification? And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you know, this I think is from Timur Kuran. Well, the problem with it is that it kind of again fetishizes this idea of pre-existing preference. I mean, if you see a random person on the street, the person is bound to have a preference. Definitely either supports the war or opposes the war. Either supports Putin or opposes Putin. Which imposes a very specific political imagination on the reality. As the society is consisting of preference having individuals, which are then added to each other and combined, yielding something like a public opinion, popular will, whatever you call it. So my problem with that, of course, is the assumption of the preferences existing. I think this actually is the criticism of the polls that have been done for years. I mean, you can find it in Bloomer, in Bourdieu. All these people were saying, stop assuming people have preferences. So I think it applies generally. There's a very, very harsh and strict model, political model imposed on the people. And then, as I always tell my students, the worst thing about your respondents who have no idea is that it's not that they will have you, they don't know or they have no idea, but they will definitely answer you, and you will never know that they have no idea, because the situation of being asked by a pollster, if the person doesn't refuse to answer at all, calls for some sort of opinion. So the answer is emergent. It is generated by the pragmatic context of this speech act. This, I think, is something completely ignored by the whole idea, and of course, by the whole theory. And of course, in some instances, at least, this might apply. at least partially apply. I mean, some people do have their preferences. Some people do have their views. Some people have no problems making them explicit when they are asked by the pollsters. But the closer we are to the situation that we have now in Russia, the more problematic it becomes. And the validity of the whole idea, I think, is very problematic. That's why actually I don't really like those experiments showing that the preferences are falsified. I mean, people are so enthusiastic about them. Well, now you see that it's not 71%, but only 56%. The numbers is the issue here, not the exact number, but the whole idea of having a percentage of the people supported that, because that, I think, and that's my concluding remark, it's what kind of imposes this plebiscitarian thinking on us. Because we subconsciously call for a plebiscite. We want a plebiscite to be held in order to know what are the real numbers. Okay, then it's not 81%. Then how much? Like, what is the way to conduct a real good plebiscite? This is the problem. This is the problem of our political imagination. I think it is the whole theory of preferences, of falsified preferences, is infected by this very problematic political imagination. I don't know if it answers.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this myself. So I think preference falsification happens in case of those who have preferences. And in this case, we should actually, I think people often present this very simplified picture of public opinion when we assume that, preference falsification happens because they have preference. Actually, two different effects happen. So for people who have no clear opinions, it's more like social conformism I described, when they kind of adopt the opinions of others because they have no idea. And for those who have more clear opinions and attitudes, preference falsification can happen. And I think, we should distinguish between these two completely different effects.
Okay, Margarita.
Yeah, just to continue on that. So I'm just right. I just finished the text exactly on this issue with preference falsification. So in order to falsify something, you should have a preference. So I completely agree with Greg and Max here. What I would like to add here, maybe just to elaborate a bit more on is there is this political scientist / sociologist John Saller who wrote a book in the early 90s. So is that there is a so-called no opinion issue. So people may have just no opinion. If you ask people about what kind of soap they prefer, they just don't know. If you just jump upon them somewhere next to the railway station, so they just don't know. They just will pick the first name that actually will come to their head. So, and in this sense, people do not falsify anything because they have nothing to be falsified. It's one thing, and this is a low stake issue. It's extremely low stakes thing, and that was clearly the case before the war, and maybe for certain respondents in Russia after the war. So basically, if people are asked, they have no opinion, they will reiterate the propaganda or the dominating opinion or the public discourse. So, and this issue was discovered based on American surveys, most of also, which is actually quite revealing. So, and if we already, the polling industry and academic knowledge has gone so far that it was already well known in the late 80s and early 90s, why are we still treating Russian surveys as if they still reveal genuine preferences of people who actually are free to express their will? So again, so adding to this preference falsification, then there is this, nice people, compliant people, and people with no opinion. So how many of them are? There is no way we can know about it. So, and so it really, really devalues the numbers we have at hand.
Yeah, Jussi and then Alexei.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up the idea of this sort of a no opinion, because I think this is why we are now in, and I'm not referring to the problem of this wartime context, and which could be seen that in a real political or some sort of a revolutionary situation where you have to choose your side. Either you are our side, you are against us, and this is of course very kind of a fabricated or imposed type of situation. But in a more freer context, the typical answer for Russian surveys in all political issues is this kind of normal now, or something like the kind of the indifference type of opinions. I remember already time of, and this is also the type of which is typically not correctly understood in some media presentations. During my PhD, when I was doing this in Nashi youth movement, I remember that was the FOM pollster, which actually demonstrated that more than 70% of Russians saying that they don't have an opinion on Nashi. Which declared actually that they generally support those values advocated by the movement because they were exactly the similar what the president was, but there was no kind of any interest to see any other kind of conveers of this kind of activities, which actually is a valuable data because it shows that Russians they are not interested in these kind of issues, and maybe this is also the defense for why they may automatically respond to some sort of an indifferent opinion regarding the foreign policy issues. And I think the Denis Volkov raised this issue that one way of showing this sort of a complete conformism is some sort of an outright approval of these issues. Well, these are issues which are not belong to us, and so let's those who understand them to handle them. And I think this is not only applicable to Russia but also in other countries, and we can say that also in Finland in the NATO option that has been echoed by the people that they are ready to make a decision after the politicians have made it, and we will follow that. So it shows actually that people don't have an opinion on foreign policy and the security policy type of issues. And of course, then the question is that when we could see that the Russians become more kind of politicized in a sense that these issues are not anymore as indifferent, that there's need and some sort of a reason to take some sort of a real political opinion in a case when we don't have such a kind of too sensitive kind of situation either for or against. And this actually is related to what Vladimir pointed out, that there is this supporters or opponents but no action kind of issues. So it's a way of that people are still prefer to kind of distance themselves of these kind of issues.
Thank you, Alexei, please.
Yeah, for me, the big question is about the predictive force of what we do. Because, okay, we say we learned that like 30% support the war, 30% don't support the war, then what? The marketers know that if they ask people, will they buy or will they not? Those results are totally useless. So you can't say how well your product will be sold if you just ask people on the streets. So what they do is developing a customer persona. What way of life a person leads, what he eats, what he drinks, how he walks out his dog, and so on, to better understand the consumer. The question for me is, what should we do as researchers in order to understand the consequences of this level of support or that level of support? How will the people in charge react to one or the other results? Well, of course, Putin will not probably react to anything, but there might be some people around him who might react. Well, to what action can this level of support or that level of support or non-support lead among people, not the establishment, but the citizens? And to me, it's the big question, because yeah, we get some data, more reliable or less reliable, but then what? It's like a blank space for me. Maybe someone can fill me in.
Okay. Well, Maxim, you raised your hand. No?
Well, yeah, I can say a few words about the previous question and then comment on what Alexei just said. Speaking about no opinion issue and the absence of this clear opinions, I think that the real problem here is, as you all emphasized, is not that Russians support the war, is that most Russians do not really care, right? It's not a low-stake issue, it's not silent, it's not kind of connected to their personal experience. And that's what we see now in our data we are collecting now. This is qualitative data. We're trying to understand how people, not how many people think this way, but how the support itself is structured, what are the kind of ideas and motives and frames. And what I see very often is that even war supporters, they resort to this very interesting style of reasoning. They say, I cannot really figure it out, just too complicated for me. That's why there are some smart people thinking about it, like Putin and officials. Let them figure it out, right? So it's not like I actively support the war. It's like I don't really understand this mess because of propaganda, disinformation, and apathy, political apathy. And Putin's regime itself has been relying on political apathy for it's basically demobilizational regime. And it makes people kind of delegate this responsibility to political leaders. And that's how the support is structured. So it's rooted not in the fact that they support it, it's rooted in the fact that they kind of do not care and feel that question their own ability to understand it. So speaking about what we can do with the data, I think like the experiment I cited in the beginning, it gives us an interesting idea. So it basically shows if you introduce this little word only to the framing, you already get like 10% difference. So people hear that only 2/3 of Russians support Putin, and you immediately get a significant difference. And I think when we think about kind of using these results and changing opinions, we tend to imagine this core regime supporter in our mind, and we are in discussion with this person, and we cannot convince him, we cannot persuade them. But in reality, most people do not have clear opinions. For them, the very demonstration that support is not solid, right? So there is disagreement already matters. And I don't know about your experience, but based on my anecdotal experience, I can say that it matters, right? So in conversations with my family, I often hear these arguments. You are saying that many people do not support the war, but on television, they just mentioned that 70% of people support Putin. So the very fact that you kind of show that there is a disagreement around, it already can tip the balance a little bit for those who have weaker preferences. So maybe not those who kind of core supporters, but still. So it's important to show these results somehow to people.
Yeah, thanks so much. Let me say a couple of words in wrapping up of this very interesting and important discussion. I mean that this discussion is definitely important from the scholarly viewpoint, and many concepts and issues such as non-responses, lack of preferences or preference falsification are traveling concepts across the time and space, and they are hardly specific for present-day Russia and may be found in different contexts. But nowadays, given the whole situation with this special military operation and weaponization of the use of survey data, these issues become quite acute, not only in scholarly terms, but also in terms of politics, as surveys become well, some sort of arguments for and against continuity of this special military operation. There was a journalist material some days ago which is stated that presidential administration in Russia don't know how to stop this special military operation, because it believes that Russians are so much excited with this special military operations that they will be dissatisfied if there will be a stop. And Grigory provided an excellent comment that probably those Russians who are in favor of this special military operation are beneficiaries of this militarism, and this is why they may be dissatisfied with that. So this is a typical instance of use of this special military operation as an argument in political decision making with the use of surveys, whether or not they tell us about real thinking of Russians is a different matter. But the problem is that even thought, Grigory dislike plebiscites, there is a problem that war is everyday plebiscite. Whether or not people want to have preferences or wants to have no preferences, there is no way to escape this binary opposition and throw it away from your everyday life. And this is why I believe that we will face with more and more need to figure out what's going on in hearts and minds of Russian citizens, and yes, Ukrainian citizens, and citizens of other countries at the globe. Let me thank all of our panelists. Let me thank our participants, especially those who raised their questions. And I hope that we will continue our discussions on these matters over time. Yes, what's going on is really very much destructive process, but at the same time, I do believe that it will be a new opening of new avenues of research, and this is why research on public preferences will be at the forefront of our agenda. Thank you, and I believe that the recording of this discussion will be available soon at the YouTube channel of the Alexander Institute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.